Ellie Turner's alarm blared at 6 a.m., a grating sound that mirrored her mood. She groaned, slapping it off and burying her face in the pillow. Another day at Belmart. Another day of dealing with people she couldn't stand. Her small apartment was cluttered with takeout containers and clothes she never had the energy to fold. The walls, once a cheerful yellow, had dulled with grime and neglect. Ellie grabbed a cold cup of coffee from the counter and downed it, grimacing at the bitter taste. By the time she arrived at the store, her patience was already wearing thin. The usual buzz of fluorescent lights and faint smell of cleaning solution greeted her. Sheila, the store manager, waved from her office. "Ellie, register 3 today. Let's keep it smooth, okay?" Ellie forced a tight smile. "Sure, Sheila. Whatever you say." As the morning crowd trickled in, Ellie's annoyance grew. Customers were either too slow, too chatty, or too needy. She plastered on a fake smile when necessary, but her disdain was hard to mask. Mr. Gerald Harris was a man of quiet authority and deep compassion. As the founder of Belmart, he prided himself on building a business rooted in community values, kindness, respect, and integrity. But recent complaints had unsettled him. Customers described cold, dismissive treatment, especially toward those who seemed less fortunate. For Harris, Belmart was more than a grocery chain. It was a reflection of his principles. Determined to confront the issue, he devised an unorthodox plan to disguise himself as a homeless man and observe his staff firsthand. The next morning, Harris transformed himself. His polished image disappeared beneath a shabby jacket, patched trousers, and a woolen cap. A smudge of dirt on his face completed the look. Staring into a small mirror in the back room, he barely recognized himself. "This will do," he muttered, his voice tinged with resolve. As he stepped onto the store floor, Harris felt an unfamiliar nervousness. Would his staff rise to the values he cherished, or had his vision for Belmart eroded? He was about to find out. The line at Ellie's register stretched into the next aisle when he stepped forward. The man looked out of place, his clothes tattered, his boots worn to the sole. The stench was undeniable, drawing whispers from the customers behind him. Ellie's lips curled in disgust. "Next," she called, her tone sharper than before. The man approached, placing a loaf of bread and a can of soup on the counter. "Good morning," he said softly. Ellie raised an eyebrow. "You call this morning? You smell like a trash bin." A woman behind the man gasped, but Ellie ignored her. She grabbed the items and scanned them, barely meeting his gaze. "That'll be $4.85, she snapped. The man fished out a crumpled bill and some coins, his hands trembling. As he counted the change, Ellie sighed loudly. "Any slower, and this bread will expire," she muttered. Finally, he handed over the money. Ellie stuffed the items into a bag and shoved it toward him. "Next time, try not to stink up the place." The man paused, his hand on the bag. His eyes, weary yet kind, met hers for a moment before he turned and walked away. "Sheila's office." "Now?" the voice boomed over the intercom. Ellie frowned, confused but not alarmed. Inside the manager's office, Mr. Harris stood by the window, his back to her. Ellie didn't recognize him. "Ellie," Sheila began, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "Do you know who this is?" Ellie shrugged. "Some guy who wandered into the store?" Mr. Harris turned, his gaze icy. "I'm the owner of this store," he said calmly. Ellie froze, the weight of her actions crashing down on her. I didn't know," she stammered. "Exactly," Mr. Harris replied. "You didn't know, yet you chose cruelty over kindness. That tells me everything I need to know about you." Maggie Williams adjusted the name tag on her vest as she approached Register 4, a mixture of nerves and excitement bubbling inside her. It had been just 2 weeks since she started at Belmart, and she was determined to make this job work. With a toddler at home and rent overdue, failure wasn't an option. The morning rush was in full swing when Mr. Harris, still dressed as a homeless man, entered the store. He lingered by the shelves, observing the staff. His heart felt heavy after the encounter with Ellie, but he held on to hope that someone might pass his test. Maggie's line wasn't as long as Ellie's had been earlier, but it moved slower. She greeted each customer with a genuine smile, taking the time to exchange kind words and offer help where needed. When Mr. Harris approached her register, Maggie's smile didn't falter. "Good morning," she chirped. "How are you today?" Mr. Harris hesitated, caught off guard by her warmth. "I'm getting by," he replied. "Well, I hope your day gets a little brighter," Maggie said, scanning his modest items with care. As he handed her a mix of crumpled bills and coins, she noticed his hands shaking. Without hesitation, she leaned over and said softly, "Take your time. There's no rush." The man's eyes watered slightly, but he quickly blinked it away. "Thank you," he murmured. After bagging his items, Maggie added, "If you ever need help or a warm meal, there's a shelter down the street. They're really kind people." Mr. Harris nodded, his voice catching as he said, "You've already helped more than you know." Ellie sat at the local diner, nursing a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She stared at the help-wanted ads in the newspaper, her jaw tightening with each page. None of these jobs were better than Belmart. Most were worse. "Fired for what?" her friend Tracy asked, stirring sugar into her tea. Ellie scoffed. "For speaking the truth. They think I'm the bad guy because I didn't roll out the red carpet for some bum." Tracy raised an eyebrow. "You mean the owner?" "Whatever," Ellie snapped. "He shouldn't have been dressed like that. How was I supposed to know?" Tracy sighed. "Maybe it's not about knowing. Maybe it's about treating people decently, no matter who they are." Ellie rolled her eyes. "Spare me the lecture." As the weeks passed, Ellie applied to job after job, facing rejection after rejection. Her bitterness grew, feeding into a vicious cycle of self-pity and blame. One afternoon, she saw a homeless woman sitting outside the grocery store, clutching a sign that read, "Hungry. Please help." For a moment, Ellie considered giving her the spare change in her pocket, but then she shook her head. "Not my problem," she muttered, walking past without a second glance. Back at Belmart, Maggie had become a beacon of positivity. Customers gravitated toward her, and her co-workers admired her ability to stay cheerful even during the toughest shifts. Mr. Harris, now back in his regular attire, watched her from a distance. His experiment had proven that while some people like Ellie failed the test, others like Maggie rose to the occasion. One evening, Maggie was tidying her station when Mr. Harris approached her. "Maggie," he began, "I want to thank you for how you treated me the other day." Maggie looked puzzled for a moment before realization dawned on her. "That was you?" He nodded, smiling. "It was a test of character, and you passed with flying colors." Maggie blushed, shaking her head. "I just did what felt right. My mom always taught me to treat everyone with kindness." Mr. Harris nodded thoughtfully. "And that's exactly why you're getting a promotion. Starting next month, you'll be the assistant manager." Tears welled up in Maggie's eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Harris. This means so much to me." As Maggie walked away, the store owner felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Belmart had become more than just a business. It was a place where kindness and integrity thrived. Outside, the neon sign flickered as the last customer left for the night. Inside, Maggie helped a struggling coworker count their register, her warm laughter echoing through the aisles. And somewhere, Ellie sat in her dim apartment, the echoes of her bitterness keeping her company.